Today I will show you two different types of exchange sacrifices, in which the first one is for the attacking purposes and the second one is more of a positional exchange sacrifice. On this position you can see that it's basically a pretty symmetrical position. The only difference is that white has already castled here and has the rook here on the open d file, which is quite a nice advantage, and it's also white's move, so that's really nice. Here, what we want to do is we want to play a3. The whole point of this is that we want to play b4, kick away this bishop, and then just develop our bishop to b2. So it will look on this long diagonal. Now, black played a6. Now, this is not the best move. The best move is just the castle, you know. Get your king to safety while you still can. Now, a6, okay. We played b4. The bishop moves and bishop to b2, of course. Now all of our pieces are developed. The next moves are probably going to be something like rook a to c1, moving the other rook to the open file, and then start to do something like knight to a4 and, you know, start jumping to these juicy squares here. So here what black again should have done, he should have just castled. But what he did was he played b5. He thought he has time to, you know, kick away our bishop and then develop his own bishop, but he actually doesn't have time for that because we can just take here on b5. Now, we're basically sacrificing a knight here, and you might say, oh, well, we're talking about exchange sacrifices today. Well, be patient, I'm gonna come to that. Here black basically took the knight back, because if he doesn't, we're just gonna play knight to c7 or something. So the whole idea of this sacrifice is that this knight is pinned now, and if the king had castled before, this wouldn't have happened, and now black is in some trouble. He has to defend this knight, and the most obvious way is to play bishop to d7, also breaking the whole pin. But there's a problem with this move. We can play rook takes d7, and this is the exchange sacrifice we were talking about. And it's more of an attacking exchange sacrifice because we want to expose the opponent's king. You know, we want the king to come into the center and then start attacking him with our pieces. So here, basically, he took the rook, because if he takes it with the knight, we can just take this knight on c6. And now we played knight to e5 check, of course. The knight is pinned, can't take our knight, and the king has to move. And we just recapture this knight back. Now, if we take a look at the material now, we have basically a bishop against the opponent's rook. But we also have two pawns, which is a big advantage here. And the opponent's king is still in the center, and this is going to cause black big trouble, as you will see. Here black played rook to b8, we just played bishop to f3, preparing rook to c1 check. Now after he played rook to f8, because also this pawn was hanging because of our knight, we of course play rook to c1 check, and after he moves to b6, we play rook to c6 check. And you can see the power of our pieces here. Even though we have more minor pieces like knights and bishops, and he has more rooks, our pieces are really active, and that's the whole point of us sacrificing an exchange, because we think that our minor pieces are actually better than his rooks in this kind of a position. You can see that his pieces are just passively defending, while our pieces are actively joining the attack, and the opponent's king is really vulnerable here. So he played king to b5, and after we give him a check, he went to a4, and you can see that this is a pretty funny king journey. We played bishop to d1 check, and after king to b5, bishop to c3. The idea is to defend the pawn on b4 and deliver a checkmate here on a4, which is a really beautiful one because, you know, the king has no squares and all of our pieces are joined in the attack. You know, the knight is protecting the rook here, this bishop is serving a purpose, this bishop here is serving a purpose, and his pieces are just kind of out of the game, you know. So this is the real beauty of exchanging your rook for the opponent's bishop or a knight, basically sacrificing it. So here he has nothing to do and we just gave him a checkmate like this. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of exchange sacrifice, but now we will move on to the positional type of exchange sacrifice. Okay, so when we talk about the positional type of exchange sacrifice, we're not going to be attacking the opponent's king necessarily, but we just want to have a strong piece that controls a lot of squares and that is basically worth giving our rook for the opponent's minor piece. So let's see what I mean here. In this position, white seems to be better, because we have a really bad bishop here on e8. He has a really nice knight on the e5 square. And also our king is kind of exposed, we have these pawns here and holes in our position, which is pretty bad. But we can try to save this position and you will see how. We can play f6 here, moving the knight away, and now bishop to g6, activating our bishop, which is a really nice thing to do because this bishop wasn't doing anything here. Once he moves the queen, we can play rook to d8, trying to put some pressure here on the d4 pawn because after all it is a backwards pawn. Now he played knight to d6. Now this knight is pretty annoying. As you can see, it's a really nice outpost for the knight and it's looking a bit too close to our king here and also attacking pawns on b7 and everything. Also blocking our rook here from attacking anything. So yeah, it's a really annoying knight, and here you can come to a conclusion that you could sacrifice your rook for that knight and just take here on d6. Now, after he recaptures, we of course recapture the pawn back. And we didn't just sacrifice our rook for a knight, but we also got this pawn here, which was on c5, which also means that this pawn is now isolated and it's going to be pretty weak. So after rook d8, attacking our pawn on e6, here, we played bishop to f5, basically protecting it for now. And after rook to d1, we played queen to d5. Now the important detail when we talk about the positional exchange sacrifices is that we want to make the opponent's rooks passive, basically. We don't want any open files, where the rooks can be active. We basically want closed files and a stable position for our good, piece that we exchanged our rook for. So here, after a3, we played rook to d8, putting some pressure on the d4 pawn. And after he moves the queen, we play bishop to e4. Of course, he has to move it to f2 to protect the pawn here on g2. And now an important move, g4. You remember what I said before, right? We don't want to open any files because, if we do something like this, he's just gonna take here on g5 and he has just opened a file, which is going to be dangerous for us because the rooks are really good on the open files. It's also attacking us like crazy here, so just closing up this file here with g4 is the best thing to do. Here he played rook to e1 and we just played f5. Closing down the position completely, and we can see that this bishop here on e4 is a really strong piece. It's attacking here on g2 and it's just closing down the file, and yeah, it's just a very powerful piece. So here white decided to play rook to d2, and after c5, which is again a pretty interesting move, he can't take this, of course, because the rook falls, and we just up a piece. So he has to somehow protect the pawn because otherwise we will take it, and he played rook to d1. Now guys, of course we don't want to take it now because he's just going to take it like this and we're just going to lose the game basically. But what we can do is we can play c4, keeping the files closed, and we have a majority here on this side of the board, which is also very nice. So after queen to e3 we played b5, and after queen to c3 we played bishop to d3, blocking his rooks from defending the pawn, and our next move might be to just take this pawn here on d4. But what's interesting about this position is that now white has the opportunity to sacrifice in exchange. And he took the bishop, of course, on d3, and after we recaptured, he took the pawn. And now this is just a pretty equal position. You know, we have equal number of pawns, and also just basically equal material. So here I moved my king closer to the center, which you should do in this kind of positions. And now we just exchanged queens, basically, and also rooks, which led to an equal pawn endgame, like this. You know, he can't move forward here because I will step in, and I also can't move forward because he will step in here. So it's just a draw. We just repeated moves. I'm interested to know which kind of exchange sacrifice you liked most. So please, if you have a favorite, write it down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.